from that story is, even from like, let's say, he would always tell me, Henry, where's the best buffet? I'm thinking Bacchanal at Caesar Palace, or and he's like, no, hometown buffet, right? And I'm like, hometown buffet? Oh, hell no, right? But the thing is all my dad's places that he mentioned, from hometown buffet to Black Angus and this Korean restaurant, which is down the street, what I noticed was they were all within 5 minutes of where my parents lived in Cyprus.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because my dad hated to drive. Right?
Yeah.
And so for me, growing up like that, I was thinking, okay, you know what? When I get older, right, I'm going to show my dad what the best is, right? Ferrari, Lamborghini, Newport Beach, caviar, and that's where a part of where my life took a whole different spin.
Yeah.
Was my goal, and I was totally only money motivated, and the only thing was I had this thing, and I gotta show my dad, and I gotta show my parents to make them proud of me by trying to make as much of millions of billions of dollars as I could.
Yeah, I want to talk about that in a little bit, but I want to go back to your upbringing, because what I find is fascinating that I'm hearing from you is your parents gave you confidence to be a better person, to aspire for more, when they gave you the description of your last name and what that meant, right?
Right.
It comes from kings. And when your dad gave you the confidence to educate yourself and get into that school, he's going to take you to the best steak. To me, I think that shows a lot about the type of parents you had, because they wanted to make you feel important and strive to do more in your life. And it seems like it worked to a degree.
It did, and let me tell you what it is I didn't know this until later on in life, and now I'm 44 years old, right? But when you're young, when you're 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 12, 15 years old, 20 years old, you don't understand what the lessons that your parents try to give you, right? So one of the things, my dad, he was, remember I told you he started off as a cashier at a gas station.
Mm-hmm.
He eventually went to night school, went to Cypress College, became an ASC certified mechanic, and then eventually saved up enough money and then opened up a gas station. So he ended up owning a Shell gas station, right? So it was right here in Norwalk, right off of Firestone and Studebaker. So, but the funny thing is and this is the funny thing, a story about my dad, is that he always liked Toyotas, right? And then I asked my dad, well, why? He goes, oh, the parts are cheap to fix, and then they're really built well, and then so I told my dad, well, I'm going to buy a Mercedes when I get older, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, no, don't buy a European car, too expensive to fix, blah blah blah, and and he goes, Audi? I said, yeah. He goes, you know what they say? I said, no. Ouch. And I'm like, Dad, then why do all the people who are rich have Mercedes, right? And he goes, you know what? They don't know. You think that just have a nice car mean that person's a good person? So he would always constantly bring me back to that.
Yeah.
And one of the things about my dad, which was find fascinating to me, is because I grew up working at my dad's gas station. And my dad would be like, so I'd have he'd have his customers come in. Hey, Mr. Park, I've got this transmission, blew out, or, I want to get it fixed. And I would see my dad, and sometimes he'd be like, no, he refuses to fix it. He goes, why don't you go and buy a Toyota, right? And they're like, no, well, this is in our family, and we won't want you to fix it. And my dad sometimes would refuse to fix it because he's saying that it's not worth the Kelly Blue Book, right?
Uh-huh.
And I would pull later on when my dad's I pull him to the side. I'm like, Dad, but if they're offering to have you fix it, they're paying you for it, right? Why don't you fix it, right? And if you have everyone go buy Toyotas, where are you going to get your customers, right? And I just remember he just grabbed my ear real tight and just boxed it, and he's like, listen, I never taught you to be like that, right? And I was like crying, oh, right? And I was like, Dad, and I didn't realize those little moments that he was actually teaching me something, and one of the things that I appreciate about my dad is he was probably one of the most honest men that I can ever, in this planet. One of the most honest people that I honestly can say that I was that I knew. You know what I mean?
It seems like he was really teaching you some values there about integrity and how he felt about charging people to work on vehicles he didn't believe in.
Exactly. I remember this one other story. This last story is I remember driving down the 405, and my dad was in this van. And growing up, my dad always liked to buy junky cars. I call them junky cars, right? And then he would fix them up, and then he would drive them for a while, and then he would sell them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So growing up, my dad had this bright orange and white van, right? And he would take me to school, right? And I was always so embarrassed. I was like, oh man, because remember I told you I went to Whitney High School, right?
Yeah.
So starting from seventh grade, I went to Whitney, which was in Cerritos, and there were a bunch of other rich kids, Indian, Chinese, Korean, and their parents are driving them in BMWs and Mercedes, and my dad has this old the dilapidated van. So I had him I was always so embarrassed, and he wanted to drop me off right in the front of the school, right? And I was just like, oh man, and I was always embarrassed. But the thing is, this one time, I remember we were just driving down the 405, and my dad was, I don't know where we were going. I think we were going to Fedco or something. But anyways, there was just happened to be a Rolls Royce that had passed by us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I told my dad, I said, hey dad, I said, take a look at that car. I said, you know what? Your son's gonna get that one day, right? And then he goes, no. He goes, why are you gonna spend the same money as a house on the car, right? He's just trying to give me another lecture. I'm like, Dad, I don't want to hear it, right? And he go, okay, what is it about this car? This car's not a good car. And he said, no, Henry, it's not the car. He goes, it's the driver. I said, what do you mean? The guy's a bad guy now? And he goes, no, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying you don't know what is going on in his mind. And I'm like, what do you mean? What's going on in his mind? He have a tax problem. This guy may be cheating on his wife, and he's talking about all these crazy problems. He goes, sometimes in life it's easy to maybe keep your life simple, right? And and growing up, I had a real resentment for that because I was thinking, you know what, Dad, maybe it's because you didn't have the balls to go out there and claim what's yours. So I'm gonna do that for you. You know what I mean? So growing up, I had this tension, especially when it comes to making money because I wanted to value the things that I felt that society per se says deems you as successful. You know what I mean? And it was until, like I said, as I got older that I realized that he was actually right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
You've had a lot of time to reflect on that the last few years. I know we'll save it for another show. We can talk about your career highlights, when you started getting into the mortgage business. But just for today's purposes, you've had some time to reflect back on the lessons that your dad taught you. We know from your website that your dad passed away. Changed your life, didn't it?
No, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it totally changed my life. You see, once you have a parent that passes on, right? And the funny thing is, for me, prior to my dad dying, right, I never knew anyone that had cancer. And I know that people say, oh, that's impossible. And hear me out. Here's what I mean, right? I always knew someone who had cancer, but it was, oh, your neighbor's cousin's sister has breast cancer. Like, oh, great. But, I didn't really know that person, right?
Yeah.
All my aunts and uncles were alive. My parents were alive. So growing up, like I said, I didn't know someone very close to me that had that. And like I said, once you lose a loved one to that, your sense of mortality, it now becomes finite, right? So that was the thing for me, because prior to that, you always think, I know it's stupid or foolish to think that you can live forever, but you think that, hey, the end is very, very, very far away.
Yeah.
And it's not until, like I said, you have something like that happen to you that you realize that no, it's actually maybe only 25 years away.
Yeah. What lessons are you teaching your kids right now after your dad passed, and what you're doing in your own life?
Well, okay. So there's a funny story that my dad always told me. Right, he used to always say, "Henry, come over here," and I'm like, "What's that?" And he said, "You see this grease in your daddy's finger, right?"
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Your daddy didn't. In Korean is appa. Appa is Korean, right? Korean for dad." He goes, "Your appa didn't go to college, so I want you to study real good, and I want you to be a doctor."
Uh-huh.
Right? So of course, now me growing up, I'm like, hey, so I have my oldest daughter's name is Katie. So I'm like, hey, Katie, all right, come here. Your appa, he didn't study that well, so became mortgage banker. So I want you to be a doctor. So me and my wife, we put our kids to private school and all that, but we're dead set on having our daughter go to college to be a doctor. Yeah, so that was the funny thing. And the funny thing is, it's again, and then nothing bad to say about mortgage, but for me, I had no interest in being a doctor, and the reason why was because I felt like you're putting in all these crazy hours, you're gonna have to pay off all these student loans, and I wanted to make money. And I wanted to make a lot of money because I wanted to show my dad that, hey, you know what, you're wrong, I was right, and I did it for the family. I did not knowing that the reason why my dad wanted me to be a doctor was to help people,
Yeah.
right? And that's really what it was all about. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Yeah, it's him fixing those dilapidated cars. I didn't realize that later on it was because his way of giving back and helping people out.
Yeah. Imagine that, right?
Yeah, exactly. So funny thing is when my dad told me, Henry, I want you to buy a Toyota. So out of protest, I went ahead and bought a Toyota, and I still have that car down to this day. It's a '97 Toyota Supra.
Yeah.
So I bought that Supra. I came and honked the horn, and I said, "Hey, Dad, here's a Toyota." And he goes, "Oh, you've been down." He goes, "I told you Toyota, like not the sports car." I said, "Well, what's wrong with the sports car?" He goes, "Parts are expensive." Right? So I said, "Okay, so Dad, what kind of car did you want me to drive?" And he told me, I don't know, maybe a Toyota Camry. I was like, Camry, Dad, I'm not going to get any chicks that are driving a Toyota Camry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was the thing.
I'm pretty sure I saw you driving around in a van one day.
Actually, that's funny. That's funny that you did tell me that. I have 4 kids now, right?
Yeah.
And so having 4 kids, it's sometimes not practical to, because you need a lot of space, right? So I was telling my wife, this is prior to my dad dying. So we were looking, we were dead set on not buying a minivan, right? And so we end up with a GL 550 Mercedes, right? But as you drive around with it, and the kids getting in and out, throwing stuff in the car, now, what else I bought? I bought a Toyota Sienna, right? Going back to Toyota, right?
Yeah.
And we drive that thing more than we drive. I think the GL doesn't even start, the GL 550, because I haven't driven it so long with the battery. And you probably replace the battery, but yeah, I mean that Toyota Sienna has got 80, put 87 octane. You spend $40 to fill it up. I mean, it's awesome.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So again, it's like, well, what's more important to you? You know what I mean? That those things I think change as time changes. You know what I mean? As you get older.
Yeah. Let's wrap this show up a little bit with what's important to you now. I understand through the passing of your father that you wanted to spend more time with your family and show them things that they haven't seen. Could you tell us a little bit about that as we kind of close this thing down?
Tell you about what now?
Yeah, just talk about your keeping up with the parks and your travel.
Okay.
Your travel plans these last year.
Oh well, prior to prior to my dad passing, I haven't been anywhere. I just probably went to Mexico, Tijuana, or Rosarito one time or 2 times.
Mm-hmm.
I think I went to Canada once, Niagara Falls, but that was just real quick on the other side of the border. But I never went anywhere.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until later on, like I said, it's once that tragic event happened. I've been to so many different countries. I went to Peru. I went to Machu Picchu. I went to Japan. I just Australia. Went to swim at the Great Barrier Reef, and I got to do a lot of cool stuff. And like I said, with my kids. You can always find my story on the website. We have a website, keepingupwiththeparks.com. But what I always try to tell people is before, I've got a bunch of little episodes that are like 2 minutes long. But before you watch any episodes, what I want you to do is I want you to go to the website, click menu, then go to our story, and I want you to read my story first, because then I think it'll give you more of an insight. Well, you read my story.
Well,
right?
I was just about ready to warn my listeners, because I did read your story. And I was in I was in a Starbucks actually, and you told me, like, call me after you read my story that I wrote. And I'm in Starbucks, like, in tears reading your story, and it was so impactful.
Oh, wow.
And I was just thrilled that the reason why we were going to talk later that day was the opportunity to work together. And knowing your story and the background by reading that really meant a lot to me. And I think that your learnings through life and being able to put that down on paper and now live that is pretty phenomenal and special at the same time.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So yeah. I mean, it was just that keeping up with the parks thing. Like I said, once you read the story, you'll understand. But it was just something that I just put together, just so I can have at least, at the worst case scenario, memories for my kids. And but it would just give me an excuse for me to kind of inspire myself to travel. I want to go and see everywhere. I want to see a bunch of different countries. I have it a goal. One of my things on my bucket list is to see every country in the whole world. But I think even with my kids, I mean, when you go through traveling, you get to try out new foods. You get to see how other people live, different cultures. And I think that also makes a big difference, you know what I mean? Especially with my kids, able to see how other people live and seeing all that stuff.
Yeah, I think it's pretty amazing. You're having an opportunity to give back to your kids in a way that maybe they might not be able to do later on in life, and that's through travel and experience and education. And I love that the foundation of all that is thinking about your father and things that you weren't able